Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Mariancho, and these are my quarterback rankings for Week 9. I usually release this video with tight ends and defenses included, and I promise you I will be posting that on the page, but I am going to include that second half for members only at this point in time. I told you last week I'm releasing a different schedule in Week 9. I'm changing things a little bit. So in this video, you're just getting quarterbacks, and then tomorrow and Friday we'll give you every other position overall. But if you want early access to tight ends and defenses, that'll be only available for members up until about Friday night. I'll post that in the evening on Friday for the public. So if you're interested, join the Blunt Rotation down below, $4.20 a month. But without further ado, let us begin at the position with the unranked players. At quarterback, we do have Joe Burrow and Carson Wentz injured, but otherwise there's 4 teams on bye. Jalen Hurts, Baker Mayfield, Justin Fields, and Dylan Gabriel are unranked. Hurts and Baker are usually in the top 10, so if you were relying on them, you will definitely need a backup quarterback. Fields is also kind of relevant in that department. But let's talk about the matchup stats. This chart right here shows you every single matchup in the league, and it's organized from most points allowed down to fewest from left to right. Those stats are in blue, the season-long stats for every quarterback matchup. And then in red, we can focus just on the last 4 games if you want a little bit more recency bias, because September is less relevant at this point in the season. So let's get going. Let's run through every single matchup here, which are the best, which are the worst. By far and away, number 1 is Dallas. So this week they get Kyler Murray, who is coming off a foot injury, not a lock to play. It's on Monday night. It's actually a bit risky to trust Kyler as a start. So you might need to handcuff him to Jacoby Brissett, which is not fun to do. But based on the stats, you should expect 20 plus points, regardless if it's Kyler or Brissett. The upgrade against Dallas is just so significant. I would start them with some level of confidence. But Kyler has been very mid, so this might be his first game this year with over 20 points. Second best matchup goes to Daniel Jones this week. The Steelers have been pretty trash on defense. But the next best matchup, number 2 on the slate this week, goes to Daniel Jones. Pittsburgh pays a lot of their salary on defense, and it is not working out at all. Their defense is pretty atrocious, giving up 20 points per game on average. So Daniel Jones should be a very safe play this week. And then the next best matchup goes to Geno Smith against Jacksonville. The game against Matthew Stafford definitely skews these numbers a bit. He had 5 passing touchdowns, but he also had less than 200 yards. And I still think in general, the Jaguars are a very good spot here for Geno Smith. But Geno's very turnover prone. If not for Bowers coming back, I don't think I would upgrade him despite these numbers. But on paper, you should consider Geno a little bit more interesting in Week 9. Next best matchup, number 4 on the slate, goes to Sam Darnold against Washington. They're also giving up over 20 points per game this season. So that is a good spot for Darnold. He's had some high upside at times. In bad matchups, he's been bad, but in good matchups, he's had a very high floor and elite upside as well. So I like Darnold a lot this week. He's my favorite streamer. I'd rather go Darnold than Geno Smith. But the top 5 matchup is also available here against the Giants for the Niners quarterback. I'm not sure at this point if it's going to be Brock Purdy or Mac Jones. I think it's Purdy, but we need to know for sure if he's practicing in full. It could still be the Mac Jones offense against the Giants. So they travel across the country. That could be a problem, but on paper, the Giants suggest you should be starting the Niners quarterback. Next up, top 6 goes to Caleb Williams. The Bengals are a good matchup for him, but he's been really up and down, really random at times in fantasy. I'm not sure I'm dying to trust Caleb, despite the matchup being a good one. They're much, much better against running backs. That is for sure. So I could see Swift and Monangai kind of vulture him. Caleb isn't running as much this year as he was last season, and for that reason, he doesn't have the same upside anymore. But the matchup says you should trust Caleb a bit extra this week. And then the next best matchup, number 7 on the list, is on bye. The Jets are irrelevant, so this kind of represents a tier break at the position. Those top 6 matchups are by far better than the rest. And then these next 4 matchups are all kind of in the next upgrade tier, all giving up over 17.5 points per game. But next on the list goes to Tua Tagovailoa, the Ravens are allowing over 18.5 points per game. And I don't know if I fully trust Tua, given how many turnovers he's thrown. However, last week he did just torch the Falcons with 4 passing touchdowns. So maybe you're a believer. It is a top 10 matchup for Tua, but I'm not dying to start him. And then in the same game, the Dolphins have been a good matchup on the season for Lamar Jackson. But if we look at the last month, they've been much more difficult, down to less than 11 points per game. But the windy game in Cleveland against Dylan Gabriel is a big factor. And then last week, they totally shut down Kirk Cousins with no Drake London. So without those 2 games, the stats against Miami are way, way higher. And I obviously trust Lamar to increase this average. I'm sure next week the Dolphins will rank much higher on this list. So start Lamar Jackson on the year. This matchup shouldn't scare you. However, the next best matchup I'm going to dismiss because of who they're going up against. JJ McCarthy gets a top 10 matchup against Detroit, but the Lions secondary should be getting healthier, and McCarthy is just not encouraging. McCarthy is very risky, and I don't really trust him. But the matchup says he should have a decent floor. The Lions don't scare you on paper. But in the last month, they have gotten more difficult, down to 15.7. Perhaps you're less excited because of the recency bias of Detroit. Next, decent upgrade goes to Joe Flacco. The Bears are allowing 17.5 points per game this year, and Flacco is throwing for at least 2 touchdowns every week in Cincinnati. So I do like Flacco a lot, but in the last month, especially since the bye week, the Bears defense has gotten more difficult, down to 14.7 points per game, and perhaps that is a little bit less exciting when you consider after the bye is usually more emblematic of what teams are actually going to put up over the course of the year. So Flacco maybe a little more neutral in terms of matchup upgrades, but still on paper, it is not a bad one. And then at number 12 on the list, this team is also on bye. The Eagles are irrelevant. So that is the last matchup giving up over 17 points per game. I think the rest of the way we're in clear neutral territory. And if you have a quarterback that's putting up bad stats, I would dismiss them. If they're a safe starter generally, then I would keep them in the lineup. But next matchup goes to Bryce Young or Andy Dalton. I'm not sure who this quarterback will be against Green Bay, but if we only look at the last 4 games, then the Packers are actually way more vulnerable, up to 21.1 points per game against the Packers. So maybe you'll buy into that, but Bryce Young has been kind of dog shit. I would not. I'm still going to bench the Panthers quarterback, whoever that is. And then the next average matchup goes to Aaron Rodgers. The Colts have been consistent all year, about 16.5 points per game. So decent floor for Rodgers, but not much upside. He doesn't throw for many yards. This season, it's not gone over 250, not even once. Next on the list would be Trevor Lawrence against Las Vegas, and that's a relatively average matchup. Lawrence is not the best play in fantasy, so not dying to start him, but not dying to bench him either. He'll probably be decent in Superflex. And then the next matchup on the list goes to Stafford, and the Saints have gotten much more difficult lately, but because Stafford threw for 5 touchdowns without Puka in London, I don't really care. I would still be starting Matthew Stafford. Next up, we have Jaxson Dart goes up against the Niners, and if we hyper-focus on the last month, then the Niners are actually a much, much better matchup than on the season, and that makes sense. Nick Bosa and Fred Warner went down. Their defensive playmakers are gone. So maybe you trust Robert Saleh, but the team has to travel to the East Coast in the early morning window. I could see a lot of upside for Jaxson Dart in this matchup. Lately, they've been giving up closer to 20 points per game, 19.8 to be exact. The next matchup is also much more vulnerable in the last month. They're a good matchup. The Vikings aren't as scary in their last 4 games, but on the season, more of a neutral overall downgrade. So Jared Goff, maybe not the safest starter, but off the bye at home, he usually plays very well in Detroit. I'm probably still considering Goff in the streaming conversation. But then the next matchup, we're starting to trickle down at 16.2 points per game. The Bucks are on bye, so I don't care about that matchup. Next on the list would be Justin Herbert against Tennessee, and Herbert has been playing at an MVP level. I'm definitely still starting Justin Herbert. But now we are officially below 16 points per game. If you get 15 or less, you're not too happy with your quarterback in fantasy. So maybe you're going to be more worried about these next several players, but in the last month, the matchup has been less difficult against Seattle. So Jayden Daniels should come back to the field on Sunday night. I think he'll be a fine starter like normal. He'll probably be in your lineup. And then Jordan Love also gets a relatively average matchup. The Panthers have been getting less difficult. In the last month, the number is up to 18.3, but on the year, it's a bad one, 15.7 on the season. So Love is kind of inconsistent. Last week, he looked amazing, but hard to trust that'll repeat. Love is still in like the streaming conversation, not an automatic start against Carolina. Next matchup goes to Cam Ward, and Ward's been really bad in fantasy, so not going to start him. And then at number 24 on this list, the Browns are also on bye. So that's kind of the cutoff point in terms of neutral overall matchups. Behind Cleveland, we're getting less than 15.5 points per game, and these are all clearly the biggest downgrades that you can find. But many of them are for quarterbacks that we consider matchup proof, so all in all, the quarterback position is not that severely impacted that much. But next on the list, you're definitely not starting Tyler Shough. The Rams are a bottom 8 matchup, and he's making his rookie debut, so no chance I'm starting Tyler Shough. But Dak Prescott, I'm still probably going to keep in the lineup. The Cardinals have been a good defense this year, about 15 points per game allowed, but Dak usually throws for multiple touchdowns, and especially playing at home, he should be just fine. So Dak is probably still in your lineup, but on paper does get a downgrade. And then Mahomes has been the quarterback 1 this year. I doubt you're downgrading him, but the Bills have also really stepped up on defense in the last month. They're not good at stopping the run, but especially against quarterbacks, it's been brutal. In the last month, the number is down below 10 points per game. They're actually just as difficult as a matchup as Houston is on the season. So perhaps you'll be concerned, but with Mahomes, I can't bench him, so kind of don't care about the Bills downgrade. And then at 28, I'm definitely not starting Michael Penix or Kirk Cousins. Whichever Falcons quarterback gets the start against the Patriots, fuck that shit. There is no upside, in my opinion, especially if London doesn't play. But next big downgrade would be for Josh Allen, who's always matchup proof. So the Chiefs are a tough spot, but Allen should be fine. I'm not going to bench Josh Allen. However, I'm definitely going to bench CJ Stroud against Denver. They shut down Dak Prescott last week, so that's not good. And on the season, they're a bottom 3 matchup, so Stroud, very touchdown dependent. I don't think it works out. But Surtain might not play. Perhaps they're not as difficult as these numbers would suggest. In just the last month, the stats are up from 13.9 up to 16.4. It's not as tough in the last 4 games, but still not going to press my luck with CJ Stroud. And then bottom 2 matchup goes to Drake Maye, but last week he had a bottom 5 matchup and still put up over 25 fantasy points. Drake Maye kind of looks matchup proof at this point, so not going to worry too much about the Falcons. Last week, Tua threw for 4 touchdowns. And then lastly, I am considering the Texans a very scary matchup. On the year, less than 10 points per game allowed. And in the last 4 games, that number is down to 7.1. It's even further down on this chart. Didn't think it was worth showing you. 9.9 kind of speaks for itself. So on the opposite sides of the spectrum, depending on which Texas NFL team you get, you're either getting a fantasy goldmine with Dallas, or you're getting the biggest downgrade possible against Houston. So Bo Nix gets a terrible matchup here. I'm definitely fading Bo Nix, not expecting a good game at all against Houston. So those are the matchup stats I wanted to run through. Now let me show you my rankings at the position, where 1 and 2 I mentioned are a downgrade, but I'm still going to put Mahomes and Josh Allen at the top. I just can't bench them. It would feel so weird to do that. And perhaps they don't finish exactly at 1 and 2, but to tell me you're going to bench Allen and Mahomes in the game of the week, what is essentially prime time in the afternoon window, while the other games are kind of not going to get much viewership, I consider this crazy if you're going to argue that Mahomes and Allen should be benched. So the matchup stats suggest they get a downgrade, but I don't care. Mahomes is the quarterback 1, and if you look at his last 5 games, he has 16 total touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He only has 1 game this season with over 300 passing yards. There is still room for improvement with Mahomes, and he's about 2 points per game better than the next best quarterback, which is Josh Allen. So no chance in hell I'm going to bench Josh Allen. What was crazy about last week is he only had 170 total yards and still scored about 25 fantasy points. So even when James Cook goes off and vultures him a little bit, Josh Allen can still put up elite numbers at the position. So that's 1 and 2. Don't get cute. You're definitely starting them. But at number 3, I debated putting Lamar Jackson at number 1. But given he's coming off the hamstring injury, he might be a little bit rusty. He might not run as much as expected, but his matchup does rank top 10. In general, you're definitely never benching Lamar Jackson. So you've been waiting for him to come back to the field. It's been about 4 weeks, if not 5, and I'm definitely not going to take Lamar out of my lineup. So if he comes back, that's what we're expecting on Thursday night. Definitely start Lamar Jackson. He should probably be ranked at number 1, but given the injury, I'll put him at number 3. But in a tier of his own, definitely an elite option. That's for sure. At number 4, these next 4 players are in a tier below, but I definitely still want them in my lineup. Daniel Jones comes in at number 4, who gets the second best matchup on the slate this week. So definitely going to trust Daniel Jones. I like his pass catchers. We know that Tyler Warren is looking like one of the best tight ends. Even as a rookie, he's really dominant, and his matchup is amazing. We'll get to him later in the video, but Tyler Warren should go off. The Steelers cannot defend the tight end position. And then Pittman is scoring a touchdown pretty much every single week. Josh Downs is really consistent, a great underrated option. And then Alec Pierce is one of the best deep threats so far this season. So love the pass catchers. Really the only risk for Daniel Jones is if Jonathan Taylor vultures him like 3+ times. And even if that happens, I still think the Colts drop 40+ points on Pittsburgh. So their offense is so good. The matchup is elite. 100% start Daniel Jones at Pittsburgh. At number 5, I'm 100% keeping Justin Herbert in my lineup. He's dominating. He's running for 31 yards per game, so that's pretty valuable. He also has Joe Alt back, so the offensive line is getting healthier. Oronde Gadsden, the rookie tight end, looks insane. And even though Quentin Johnston might be dropping passes, last week, QJ didn't even get targeted. So it doesn't matter. They can put up elite numbers without him. And Justin Herbert is playing at an MVP level. I can't think of a flaw. He's a must-start quarterback every week moving forward. At number 6, I have Jayden Daniels versus Seattle, and the Seahawks matchup does rank bottom 11, so on paper it is a slight downgrade, but that's not really the reason why I'm worried about Daniels. He should play fine. However, Terry McLaurin was ruled out, so he doesn't have a full bevy of weapons. That's not ideal, and then coming off an injury, historically, whenever that happens, he does not run the ball at the same rate, so he's not quite the player you expected when you drafted him. Those elite upside games just aren't really happening as often this year. And then he's also missed 3 total games on the season. So he plays Sunday night. You might need a backup if he's inactive. I think he'll play. I assume he will, but you have to make sure, even if he is though, downgrade him a little bit because of the Seahawks, and then also factoring in less rushing stats. Most likely that'll happen. That usually is the case coming off an injury for Jayden Daniels. So at QB6, I'm still going to start him, but I'm not ranking him as elite as we expected when we drafted him. At number 7, I want to rank Drake Maye much lower, but I just can't do it. Last week, he had a bottom 5 matchup. Same happens this week. And he kind of torched the Browns in the second half. He went off. So he's looking matchup proof. He also runs the ball pretty well. Every quarterback I've mentioned so far has pretty good rushing stats every week. So love all of them. I think they're all the best quarterbacks in fantasy. But honestly, there's some players in this next tier that are still really good. Like Dak Prescott, I could have ranked higher, but on paper gets a bottom 8 matchup against Arizona, who are coming off a bye. Maybe their defense is getting healthier. Perhaps their first-round pick, Walter Nolan, will finally make his debut. However, the Cardinals are also really hungry for a win. They've lost 5 straight, and off the bye, I expect their defense to play well. So in general, Dak is pretty matchup proof, but last week was an indication in tough spots he can be held back. He had 2 interceptions and no touchdowns last week, but he got vultured twice by Javonte Williams. In general, that's really the only scenario where he's played poorly in fantasy. Week 1 and week 8, he had bad games. Otherwise, though, he's been phenomenal. In his 5 other games, he has 16 touchdowns and only 1 interception. Those numbers are on par with someone like Mahomes. Dak Prescott is playing elite football for the most part this year. So the Cardinals don't scare me enough to bench him, but enough to downgrade him just a little bit. At number 8, I'm still telling you to start him, but given his rushing stats are nowhere near those of every quarterback I ranked above him, I have him at number 8. That's the highest I can go this week, given the Cardinals are not the best matchup you could ask for. At number 9, I have Matthew Stafford versus New Orleans, who gets an average neutral matchup. I'm not going to downgrade him at all this week. And the last time we saw him, he threw 5 touchdown passes against the Jaguars with no Puka Nacua. So with Puka probably coming back, the ceiling is back to elite. And other than the Ravens game, there haven't really been any other bad performances by Stafford. But even counting the Ravens game when he only had 1 touchdown, if we look at his last 4, he is still averaging 3 touchdown passes per game. He had 3 against the Colts, 3 against the Niners, and then 5 against Jacksonville. He also had 2 against the Titans and Philadelphia. In general, you get a very, very safe floor from Matthew Stafford, but he's also had an elite ceiling. He has multiple games with over 375 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. Those high-end games are so valuable. I want to bet on those more so than the bad ones. So I like Matthew Stafford a lot. I think he's actually a dark horse MVP candidate. Not too many people are talking about him that way, but he's playing amazing this year. And coming into the season, we were worried about his back injury. That looks like a big question mark that we can dismiss. So not worried about Stafford at all. I think he's going to have a very good game against New Orleans. At 10, my favorite streamer on the week would be Sam Darnold at Washington. And the Commanders are the 4th best matchup you can find. The main reason why is because they give up a shit ton of touchdown passes. Both of the last 2 games, 3 touchdowns allowed. And they also allow over 21 rushing yards per game with no fumbles forced at all. So I don't really trust the Commanders' defense very much this season. They're not really playing up to last year's production. And despite some big names on that roster, a lot of veterans that are just maybe past their prime. So I love this matchup for Darnold this week. I think he can throw for over 300 and 3 touchdowns. And he's my favorite streaming option. He's still somewhat available on the waiver wire. Perhaps he is taken already. But if you have to replace Jalen Hurts or Baker Mayfield, this is the player I want to do it with. Love the matchup for Darnold. And I also think his weapons are pretty underrated. We know about JSN, but AJ Barner is still being slept on. I think he scores a touchdown in a good matchup for him this week. I also think off the bye, maybe Cooper Kupp steps up, but really Torrey Horton, their rookie 5th round pick, I think will start to be more involved in the offense going forward. There could be a second half breakout for the rookie Torrey Horton. So I like Sam Darnold a lot this week. The upside we've seen has been elite at times. Go back to that Buccaneers game. If he gets into a shootout against Jayden Daniels, he can definitely hold his own and keep up. So I think Darnold is a very good play. Last time we saw him, the game was really ugly against the Texans, but the Texans are the toughest matchup on paper. You would expect a bad performance from anyone against Houston. So I will write that off. I will lean into this matchup, and I trust the upside will be there for Sam Darnold. He's a top 10 play, in my opinion. At number 11, I'm not sure if Brock Purdy is coming back to the lineup this week, but if he does, the matchup on paper is top 5. The Giants can't really stop anyone at quarterback. So given George Kittle is healthy, I think that's kind of the only big name weapon he needs to put up good numbers. The Kyle Shanahan quarterback has still been producing good numbers, even though Purdy has missed time. But given his toe injury might still be lingering, I'm not expecting a avalanche of rushing yards from Purdy, so that could be a problem, maybe caps his upside. They do have to travel to the East Coast to play in the early morning window. Perhaps they don't look the same on offense, but I trust this matchup. The Giants are really vulnerable right now, and in the last 4 games specifically, they would rank as the 2nd best matchup on the season. They rank top 5. So I like this matchup. I'm going to trust it. And the main thing you can expect when you go up against the Giants is that they won't force any turnovers. They've only caught 4 interceptions in 8 games this year, and they've also not forced a single fumble. Another big upgrade would be in the rushing category. They've allowed 4 rushing touchdowns over the last 3 games. Brock Purdy has a good shot to score a rushing touchdown against the Giants. So I think the floor is pretty safe in general with Purdy, and as long as he's healthy, the matchup is so good, I would consider him a safe start. At number 11, I am telling you Brock Purdy is a fine plug and play. You've been waiting for him. Maybe you dropped him, but I do think he's a fine option as long as he does play at the Giants. At number 11, I think he's a fine starter in week 9. At number 12, I have Jordan Love versus Carolina, and we are dropping down a tier. I think there's not the same proposition in terms of upside and floor with these next 5 quarterbacks, but Love played insanely well last week, 300 plus yards and 3 touchdowns. He's done that twice this year, but otherwise has been very inconsistent. I'm still waiting for like multiple great games from Love. If that happens, then I'll consider him more of a must start. I like his upside, but his floor has been a little bit lackluster this season. There are still some games with less than 15 points on Jordan Love's game log this season. So it could come back to that. He could come crashing down after an elite game against the Steelers. The Panthers matchup is nowhere near as good. It ranks bottom 12, so definitely not an upgrade. And I do think people are kind of sleeping on the Panthers defense. But the main reason why Love is not hyper productive is because Josh Jacobs often vultures him for multiple touchdowns. I could definitely see that happen again, and if it does, then you might get screwed with Jordan Love. But this is a great matchup for Tucker Kraft, and with Christian Watson coming back to the offense, the pass catchers should keep the floor pretty high. I would expect good yardage from Jordan Love this week, but touchdowns will be critical. I can't guarantee that they will hit. Despite last week's elite performance, I only have Love at number 12. I don't think he'll be as good as he was last week, but a pretty safe floor in general from him. I think he's a fine option, but not my favorite. I'd rather go Darnold than Jordan Love. At number 13, I think Jaxson Dart has some legitimate upside this week. In his 5 starts, he has 4 rushing touchdowns in those 5 games. What's weird is the last 2 weeks, he's only averaging 14 rushing yards per game. And in his first 3, he was averaging 55. So for whatever reason, Brian Daboll is trying to coach that out of him and maybe trying to just keep him healthy. But I think without Cam Scatterbo, their run game is going to need him to contribute. And last week, the Niners gave up 30 rushing yards to CJ Stroud, who rarely ever goes over 10. So I see them as a vulnerable defense in that category. I do think Dart will scramble and pad the numbers. And in general, you get a rushing touchdown as well. That covers an interception if it happens. But the Niners defense is pretty depleted. In the last month, they've allowed close to 20 points per game. I consider it a very good matchup here for Jaxson Dart. They also have to travel across the country for the early game window. So I could see their defense kind of tired and slow. I think Jaxson Dart will play pretty well. He also has some good pass catchers that are kind of underrated. I think a touchdown for Theo Johnson can be predicted with some accuracy. Wandale's looking okay. And then Darius Slayton has come back to the offense. There is some upside down the field. Dart, I think, is a safe floor play. He has a minimum of 18 fantasy points in all 5 games this season. So the floor is bust-proof. The ceiling is 25 points. Against the Niners, I think he's a fine start. But at 13, not a lock in your lineup, more of a deeper format option. But if you're trying to replace Baker or Jalen Hurts, I think Jaxson Dart is a perfectly viable option to do that with. Maybe you can't get your hands on Darnold, but Dart would be a great consolation prize. But he's also rostered a lot, so he's probably just your backup. Might keep him on the bench depending on who you have, but if you do start him, I would expect at least 18, if not 20 plus points from Jaxson Dart. At number 14, I want to rank Kyler Murray at Dallas much higher, but honestly, I just can't do it. Kyler gets the best matchup you can find, and if you just look at the averages, you would expect 20 to 24 points per game from every quarterback against the Cowboys. But Kyler has yet to go over 18 points in a single matchup this year, and it's also not a lock that he plays on Monday night. He's still dealing with that foot injury, so that also might cap his rushing upside as well. So Kyler is just not inspiring. He has at least 15 points in every game, but basically 15, 16 in every single one. And in 5 games that he's played, he only has 7 total touchdowns. Only 1 of them has come on the ground. So to expect more than 1 passing touchdown from Kyler rarely ever works out. If it wasn't against Dallas, I wouldn't even rank him in the top 20. So I'm worried that he doesn't suit up and you get left with a bagel on Monday night. The only other pivot option would be Dak Prescott or Jacoby Brissett. If you have Dak, I'd rather just start Dak and fade Kyler entirely. But if you have to trust Jacoby Brissett, that doesn't feel good. It's only the matchup why you would consider doing it at all. So I am upgrading Kyler. I want to rank him much lower, to be honest, but the matchup against the Cowboys is so good. He is in the streaming conversation, and I would consider him a safe, bust-proof option this week. Perhaps it's his first game of the year with over 20 points. At 15, though, Joe Flacco has been really good since joining the Bengals. He has at least 2 passing touchdowns in all 3 games. So his ceiling has been pretty high. The floor is also pretty safe when those numbers are available. He also has not thrown an interception, and that's pretty impressive. So Flacco is currently questionable at the moment, but I assume he'll play. I don't fear the Bears matchup too much, and given it's at home, I think he'll play just as good as he has been. So Flacco should be fine. I want to rank him above Kyler Murray a lot, but honestly, I just can't do it. The Cowboys matchup is just so good for Kyler. I will keep Flacco behind him. But at 15, I think you could start him and get 20 plus points. The argument is not that bad. Flacco has been pretty good since joining Cincinnati. At 16, the last player in this tier is always a bit touchdown dependent, but Jared Goff usually plays very well in home games in Detroit. So in this division rivalry versus the Vikings, it's not a good matchup. It does rank bottom 17s, but it's also not a bad one. It ranks pretty neutral. So I'm not changing my projection on Goff because of the matchup, but it's really just coming down to touchdowns. When Goff throws for less than 2 touchdowns, he has no ceiling at all. The floor can sometimes be down to like 10 points, and if you get stuck with 14, wouldn't be shocked at all. He never runs the ball, and if he throws multiple turnovers, then you will get screwed. So Goff is a high boom, high bust variance player, and when you don't get those multiple touchdown passes, you are really disappointed. You can always expect Gibbs and Montgomery to usually vulture him at least once. So Goff is kind of tricky, but last year's upside seems to have gone away. I'm never really expecting more than 20 points from Goff. If he gives you more than 16, you're kind of somewhat satisfied. He hasn't done that too often this season. So Goff is fine, but not the safest option. At 16, I think you could do better. But if you're in a pinch, I would expect a safe floor play production from Goff in week 9. Rest of the way, though, I'm trying to bench all these quarterbacks and I don't feel too confident in any of them, but honestly, there are some good matchups still left on the board. You could pivot to them and be okay. At 17, Caleb Williams at Cincinnati has been really inconsistent, especially since the bye week. His rushing stats have completely gone away from him. Last year, he was averaging over 30 rushing yards per game, and since week 3, he's only gone over 13 rushing yards once. That was last week. Otherwise, there's multiple games with negative rushing yards, and that is not helping you at all. So with only 2 touchdown passes in his last 4 games total, that is really capping his upside. The floor has kind of evaporated. The Ben Johnson offense is looking more like a run-first team since the bye week. So not excited to start Caleb Williams. The only reason I rank him this high is because of the matchup. It does rank top 6, but honestly, I don't think it's really that important to care about. The Caleb Williams experience is just too up and down, and when it's bad, it is gross. Just like Goff, you could get less than 14 points, and it wouldn't shock you at all. Even in a good matchup, I'm not dying to trust Caleb in my lineup. So at 17, behind the tier break, I would be benching him, but in a Superflex format, the matchup is good enough, or I would consider him still top 20. At 18, I have Aaron Rodgers versus the Colts, and the Colts are a relatively fine matchup here, so you're hoping for some garbage time. Rodgers, though, does not throw for many yards. He has not a single game this season with over 250. So very touchdown dependent. And although he has multiple games with 4 touchdowns this year, in general, you're only getting about 1 or 2 from Rodgers. So without multiple scores, you will get left with about 15 points as well. So I see limited upside, needs the garbage time production. I think he'll be fine, but not impressive. You're probably getting about 15, 16 points from Aaron Rodgers this week, and that's just not enough to get the job done. So I'll bench him. I'll pass if I can on Aaron Rodgers. And at 19, I'm probably going to pass on Trevor Lawrence as well. In general, Trevor Lawrence is just a floor play. The Raiders are a neutral matchup, so no significant upgrade for him. And there's also a chance that Brian Thomas Jr. does not play in this game. So if that's the case, I'd be dropping down T-Law even further. But in the top 20 in a Superflex league, I could understand putting him in the lineup. But these next 4 players are the last ones I would consider with any level of confidence in a Superflex format. You got to be a bit desperate, but with 4 teams on bye, maybe that's what you are. At 20, we got Geno Smith versus the Jaguars, and I mentioned it earlier, the matchup is top 3 for Geno, so he should get an upgrade, especially with Bowers coming back. That should be a big boost to the value and upside. However, he's very turnover prone, and if you get 3 picks again, wouldn't shock me at all. I kind of feel like the Raiders should just trade for Russell Wilson. I don't think it would be as bad with Russ as it is with Geno, but I'd also love if they could get Jameis Winston, but for whatever reason, I don't know if the Giants are trying to move off of him. So Geno Smith still is the guy in Las Vegas at the moment, and given this matchup is top 3, there is upside, but I don't want to bet on it. At QB 20, I would definitely bench him if I can. At 21, another upgrade goes to Tua versus Baltimore this week, and maybe you're going to trust the matchup stats. Maybe you'll believe that last week was a sign of things to come. Tua did throw for 4 touchdowns against the Falcons, which do rank as a bottom 3 matchup on the year for quarterbacks. So he did turn it around. It was a big shocker. No one saw it coming, and I'm not going to bet on it to repeat. So despite a top 10 matchup for Tua, I'll keep him on the bench, if not the waiver wire. I'm not excited at all to trust Tua in any spot. I'm never dying to do it with Tua. No thanks. If I can avoid it, I will. But a matchup I am completely avoiding is that Texans-Broncos game. Despite Bo Nix's elite production at times this year, I just can't endorse him. The matchup against the Texans is just so difficult. On the year, they allow less than 10 points per game, and then in the last 4, they have only given up 7.1 points per game. So Bo Nix gets a massive downgrade. The Texans are just so difficult, and I just do not see the upside. I think there's going to be multiple turnovers from Bo Nix in this matchup. So on the road, it's not a great spot. The Texans are just so scary. I will bench Bo Nix with conviction. If he proves me wrong, though, then I will stop hating on the Broncos, and I will endorse him as a top 10 play rest of the season. If he puts up great numbers against Houston, then he would totally prove me wrong, and I would have to acknowledge he is way better than I give him credit for. So want to rank him higher, but the matchup is just so bad. In the same game, I'm not going to trust CJ Stroud versus the Broncos at all either. I think the Texans can win, but that's not a lock. And even if they do, the final score is probably like 13-10. I don't see much offense from either team. So no thanks with Stroud. He's played well in his last 2 games, but I just hate this matchup. Even if Surtain doesn't play, I still consider it a big downgrade for CJ Stroud. But Nico Collins should come back. The touchdowns might be there. I doubt it, though. I don't see much upside for Stroud. The matchup is too scary. The rest of the way, these last 5 quarterbacks, I think you're 100% benching, and these next 3 aren't as bad as the last 2, but no upside, in my opinion, for guys like J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, or Bryce Young. With McCarthy, he does get a top 10 matchup, but he's looked really bad when active, and given it's his rookie season and he's been out, they've been trying to shelter him from looking like shit and ruining his confidence. So perhaps, given this game is in the state of Michigan, where he's a bit of a darling given his quarterback success in college, maybe he plays well, but that's really the only argument I can find to endorse him. I like his weapons, but I just don't really trust him, and I think he'll play poorly. I don't see it. I'm going to bench J.J. McCarthy. Until he proves me wrong, I will not be starting him in fantasy. At 25, I think Penix will get back on the field, but against the Patriots, not going to start him at all. It's a very rough matchup, bottom 5 here at New England, so no chance I'm starting him. There's also a chance that Cousins gets the start again, so no thank you with a Falcons quarterback. And then Bryce Young rarely goes over like 14 fantasy points himself, so not going to start him at the Packers, but the matchup isn't terrible. The Packers are actually a top 13 matchup, so maybe he plays better, but not trusting him at all. And then lastly, in the bottom tier, the fuck no territory, Cam Ward versus the Chargers. Hell to the no. That team is really bad. And then Tyler Shough making his rookie debut at the Rams. Fuck that shit. You're asking to lose with Tyler Shough. So, all right, so that's it for the individual ranks. These are all 28 on the screen, and I feel like the top 16 are the only ones I'm really comfortable starting if I have to. Beyond the black line, that's my cutoff point in a regular one quarterback league. If you have to stream the position, I think realistically, the most likely guy you'll get is Sam Darnold. If not, I still like Flacco. Maybe he's not available. If you have to pivot to the waiver wire and you can't get Darnold, then just go Geno Smith. Get Geno or Trevor Lawrence. God, that sounds gross, but the Jags matchup is actually pretty good for Geno Smith. Fuck. Saying it out loud really sounds bad. I hope you can get Darnold. I really do. But obviously at the top, you're not benching Mahomes, Allen, or Lamar. And I could argue for Lamar at number 1, but let's stick with the marquee matchup at 1 and 2 with Mahomes and Allen going head to head. But Jones in such a good matchup at number 4, really don't want to face Daniel Jones this week. Herbert, also a nightmare, been amazing this year. And then Jayden Daniels, I still would be afraid of. He's still so good. I know they don't have Terry, but kind of don't give a shit. It's just the Seahawks defense that's a little more concerning. If he runs like normal, though, then he would be on par with Lamar Jackson. Number 7, I want to downgrade Drake Maye, but if you have Drake Maye, you're not benching Drake Maye. It's really hard to argue to fade Drake Maye. So because Tua played so well, I don't downgrade him at all against the Falcons. But on paper, it should be a tough spot. I want to put Dak and Stafford in the same tier, though, as those top 7, but I just can't. They don't run the ball as much, and if they have a bad game, they have a really, really bad game. The rushing stats give you that safe floor, where at worst, you're still getting like 16, 17, and you're not too upset about it. But if you get less than 10 with Dak or Stafford, it's unlikely, but it is possible. That's why I don't have them in the same category as the top 7. But Darnold and Brock Purdy are my preferred streamers. You're more likely hanging on to Purdy, and he's on your IR slot, so he's kind of not a streaming quarterback. But given we haven't trusted him a long time, I feel like I'd probably put Mac Jones here if Mac Jones was a starter. I trust the Niners quarterback kind of equally, and Purdy's coming off an injury. Mac Jones is also questionable. I think Purdy will start, but it's not a lock as of yet on Wednesday evenings. But Darnold, boy, the matchup is good off the bye. I really like Darnold. I think Darnold will have a great, great game. I want to rank him much higher, I'll be honest, but I'm not going to do that. At number 10 feels like as high as I can go. Logistically, I wouldn't bench Prescott or Stafford for Darnold, but in the same tier, equally high upside, that's for sure. But Love, I hope, can do it again. I just think those 300-yard games are going to be like a little more sporadic than every week. If he can give you that type of yardage, then I'd be excited. But it usually correlates with touchdowns when he goes off for high yard games. And otherwise, Josh Jacobs is just such an annoying factor for Love's value. So that's why I can't put him in the tier above. But if he does start to be consistent, then I will definitely upgrade him more consistently. Dart, love the floor, pretty bust proof. And then Kyler, just because the matchup is so good, like you can hope for the ceiling, but I kind of don't buy it. I kind of don't think you're getting more than 17 points with Kyler Murray, regardless of who he plays. Not going to lie, I think I'd rather have Jacoby Brissett. I kind of think that's a more ideal backup plan than pivoting to somebody else off the wire. Like, I'd rather not go Geno Smith. Give me Jacoby Brissett if Kyler doesn't play. But because it's Monday night, it's just kind of wasted. There's a lot of risk starting that Cardinals quarterback. It's possible you start Kyler and then he gets hurt again and then Jacoby finishes the game. I just don't really want to deal with that. But the Cowboys matchup is always really enticing. It feels like starting Bryce Young against the Cowboys. He did have a good game, but you didn't feel confident betting on it. Flacco has been so good, so I'll keep him in this streaming territory, but I feel like a bad game is coming. He hasn't thrown a pick yet, and that seems like it's ready to crash and burn. The Bengals, I think, are teetering. You know, they can beat anyone, but they're more likely going to lose to just about anyone. They lost to the Jets. Maybe they bounce back, but it could start to really, really spiral. He's also not a lock to play. I believe he's also questionable as well. There should be a Q next to his name. Goff, though, high upside, but rough when it doesn't happen. He's not my favorite start, but he could have one of those 5 touchdown games against the Vikings. Maybe not in division. Then Caleb, Aaron Rodgers, and Trevor Lawrence. I can see the path, but I just don't really want to trust it. I would rather fade them. They're not that consistent this season and limited upside with very touchdown dependent production. If Caleb's not going to run it much, then his floor is gone. And Lawrence doesn't usually have much of a ceiling in general. Rodgers, very touchdown dependent, needs garbage time. Not much yardage for him. Geno, Tua, Bo Nix, and CJ Stroud. I would love to start Nix if it wasn't this matchup. The Texans are just so scary. And there's just something gross about all four of them. Like with Geno, it's just Geno. That's gross in and of itself. But Tua is also disgusting. If you get 4 picks this week instead of 4 touchdowns, don't be surprised at all. It's also Thursday night, and I still remember last year's Thursday night game against Buffalo when he went down with a concussion. It probably is still going to happen some point this year. But then Bo Nix should be better, but the Texans are just so difficult. Stroud versus Denver probably has a game like Dak. Needs touchdowns, and I just don't want to bet on the ceiling. So I'll fade him, but I get it if you're stuck starting one of them. And then JJ, Penix, and Bryce Young, very, very cap ceiling. I don't trust JJ, but he did have a somewhat good game week 1 against the Bears in division. Maybe it's possible, but I just want to see it before I endorse it. And then Cam Ward, Tyler Shough, fuck that. Fuck that shit, man. That's pretty rough. Anyways, that's it for the video. I will update these on Saturday. Hopefully we don't have to insert Mac Jones, Brissett, Mariota, Cousins, or Dalton, but there are 5 like legit questionable tags that may force me to swap them out with their backup later on in the week. But stay tuned, and if you want those tight end and defensive rankings, then join the Blunt rotation, and they will be posted by the end of the week. But if you want early access, go ahead down below. They are available at the click of a button. But that's it for me. My name's Adam Riancho. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I will see you next time on the channel. That'll be tomorrow. Peace out. Later. Bye-bye.